You can't convince a CEO to spend 1 hour with you for a 50-pound Amazon voucher. One thing that I can see in the future is products that build products. There's a moral discomfort with the idea of mimicking people and with the idea of AI almost in general.
Hugo Alves is the co-founder of Synthetic Users, a platform that helps teams accelerate early-stage research with AI-powered interviews. With a background in clinical psychology and years of experience in product management, Hugo combines a scientist's curiosity with a builder's mindset. Join me as we explore how synthetic users can supercharge early product discovery while staying grounded in human insight. Welcome, Hugo, to the Getting to Alpha podcast.
Hi, Amy. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here. Thanks so much for the invitation.
I'm so thrilled that you're here. I want to get started by winding it back and talking about how you got into design and tech, what your path was. What did you study back in school, and how did you navigate your way to co-founding and running Synthetic Users?
My background is not tech. I'm not an engineer by education. I didn't study design. When I was growing up, I wanted to be a scientist. And one of the most interesting things for us to study is humans. I did a master's in clinical psychology. Typically, you're expected to go and become a psychologist, that kind of people we see in movies that are helping other people understand them. But when I was finishing my degree, I understood that was not what I wanted. So I stayed in my university and I worked in the psychology lab for around 6 years and managed the day-to-day operations of the lab with everything that involves setting up experiments, helping the researchers analyze data, finding new experimental paradigms. And one of the core tasks I had was to manage the participant pool. At that time, most studies in psychology would recruit a psychology student. First year, second year, they would get some course credit to go to the lab and spend half an hour doing a couple of different experiments. And one of the challenges that I was faced every semester, I would have all the researchers knocking on my door and saying, Hugo, I need 200 participants for this study, 100 for this, and I have a pre-test of some material that needs 50 more. And then another one would come and the same thing would happen. And what happened every semester is that I didn't have enough participants for all the studies that were supposed to be run. So at the time, Amazon Mechanical Turk was already a thing. So people were already starting to run some studies online. So what I wanted to do was build an online participant pool where anyone with a smartphone or a tablet could be part of psychology and cognitive science research while making some money in the comfort of their homes or in the doctor's office waiting for their appointment. So I left my job at my university at the psychology lab to try to convince someone to build this with me. And my kind of master plan was, I'm going to join a place where there are designers and developers, and I'm going to pitch them that idea. And they're going to look at me and say, Hugo, this is the best idea ever. I'm going to quit my job and I'm going to build this with you. From my tone, I imagine you already understood that this didn't happen. And I became a product manager, a little bit by accident, because my Trojan horse to join that agency was to be a social media manager, which I also was at my university. And I ended up becoming a product manager because my boss turned to me and said, hey, you're always finding bugs and suggesting improvements. You want to be the product manager? And I looked at her and I said, Lily, give me a second. And I turned around, I Googled product manager. And I said, yes, I do want to be. And that's what I've been doing for the last 12 years. Product management in different startups, some smaller ones, some larger ones, at B2B, B2C. And throughout that journey, we always need to understand whether we're building for, be it the stakeholder at a corporation that you want to understand what they struggle with in their workflow, be it the consumer, and you want to help them have a better quality time with their kids. We need to understand those people. And the best way to do that is to do research. One of the most important things is go talk to them, go ask them questions. There's a lot of science and art in asking good questions, but that's an amazing way to do that. But it's really hard sometimes to find them. And you can't convince a CEO to spend 1 hour with you for a 50-pound Amazon voucher. People's time is really valuable. And that is something that any researcher has experienced. The no-shows, the kind of shallow answer. So me and Kwame, when GPT-3 came out, we started talking about, hey, have you seen what these large language models can do? People were asking the models, hey, can you write a poem about Lisbon in the style of Shakespeare? And would be really impressed. And what we understood was that not only were these models really good at capturing Shakespeare's writing style, good enough at least, but they were also really good at understanding how people make sense of the world. What do they like? What do they hate? Have challenges with? What are their pains, their angsts? And that's how we decided to build synthetic users.
So in some ways, you and I have a parallel path. I too started in clinical psychology and thought that was what I was going to do. And I think that background as a scientist is so useful. It's part of why I'm really interested in sharing your point of view, because you do have the heart and the mind of a scientist. You seem like someone who's very interested in changing your mind depending on the data that comes in.
Yes, it's really hard because one of the things that is core to the human nature is cognitive dissonance. We want to avoid cognitive dissonance. So if we do believe something, if there's some kind of belief that we have, we normally go for information that confirms it. That's what's called confirmation bias. We prefer that kind of information. But it's so essential for us to have an accurate view of the world, to be able to change our minds and to recognize that we might have been wrong, or we might not have enough information to make an informed decision or to have an informed attitude regarding something. That I think having a healthy dose of skepticism and being willing to change our minds and to recognize that we might have been wrong or we might have not have all the information that we needed, I think that's a core thing. I have 2 pairs of socks that say skepticism. So it's one of those things that I take to heart as an important value in my life.
Well, you're here today because of my own skepticism and willingness to change my mind. When I first heard about your company, because how long have you been in business? When did you found Synthetic Users?
So me and Kwame started 3 years ago, way before ChatGPT.
So that's really interesting. How did you settle on this model? Because clearly you considered some others.
It's one of those things. I think with all these big waves of change, be it the internet, be it mobile, and now AI, which is kind of the new one, there's a group of people that look at what's coming and they say something is coming, that they identify an opportunity. Although because it's such a big change, it's hard to really pinpoint how to best take advantage of it or how it's going to play out. So what we decided to do was, let's give ourselves some space to experiment. Because me and Kwame, he was the boss of the agency I joined when I first moved into tech. We worked together loads of times, but we weren't working together at the time. And I sent him a message, hey, have you seen this? And I sent him a couple of examples of stuff that GPT-3 could do. And he told me, hey, can you build a bedtime story generator for my daughter? And oh, that's a fun experiment. And I went to a no-code tool, Adamo, and I built a small web app that I connected to the GPT API that you would just give it 2 characters and kind of an overarching moral of the story, and it would write a small bedtime story. And I sent this to him, and he was like, dude, come to the office Monday. And I went to the office, and we were like, what are we going to do? And he's like, I don't know, but let's experiment. So what we decided to build in the early days was we knew we wanted to help product builders, designers, product managers, user researchers. And we thought that let's build something where they already are. And I think most people are now familiar with Miro, which is that on my whiteboard solution. This was post-COVID, so most people had at least been forced to experiment with Miro. And we decided, let's build Miro plugins, because there was the risk of relying on someone else's platform for distribution. But in the beginning, it can be a good play. Zynga is a good example of this. And they started taking off using Facebook feed as their driver. And of course, then Facebook cut their access, but still they were able to build a big business out of it. And that was kind of our play. So in the beginning, we built a lot of different small prototypes, small ideas on top of Miro. One was a mind map explorer. I'm still quite fond of this idea. Essentially, you would create the shape on Miro, you would write something there, and then on a sidebar, you could just click a button and we would create a mind map around that concept. And then if you click another node in that mind map, you could expand, you could remove, you could ask for a definition. It was a playful thing. We built a business model canvas assistant. So you have those templates on Miro with the business model canvas. This one, you would just give it the idea of your business that you wanted to build, and it would add post-its on each one of the sections of the business model canvas with your value proposition, with your key resources, with all the things. In that case, we're trying to kind of solve the empty canvas challenge that people have when they have to do these tasks. We built one that I still like, which was essentially an ecosystem mapping around this idea of when you build products, you affect not only your direct users, but you affect the communities that are involved, you affect the resources that might be needed to build whatever you want. So it was a thing to bring more of a planetary view to product building. And we also built a persona canvas. And there came a time then that we felt we had to make a decision. I was fond of the idea of having this suite of tools that people could just play and around, but no one wakes up and says, oh my God, I need a mind map creator. But sometimes people wake up and say, oh my God, I need to schedule some user interviews and it's going to cost me, it's going to be 3 weeks to do this. And that's why we took the Persona Canvas one, which was the seed for synthetic users. And we decided we are confident enough not to make this just a Miro plugin, and let's build a full platform around this. So this is essentially how we experimented around large language models, their capabilities, and how best could we use what we knew, what was kind of my background, what was Kwame's background, which is more design oriented, a lot of consultancy, and to figure out how to serve other people who want to build quality products and services.
When I first heard about this, like most experienced researchers, I was horrified. And I thought, this is what it can't do. It can't give you the kind of fresh, new insights that you can get from running really good play tests with well-chosen ICPs. It won't deliver that. It could never deliver that because that's a lot of what I do. But then I started to realize that there's a lot of things it can do. It's okay that it doesn't do that. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, you don't believe that this replaces customer research with real people.
No, not at all.
But what's exciting is what it can do, how we can slot it into our workflows to help us, to accelerate us. So what have you learned about that? How are synthetic users best utilized? Where's the sweet spot?
So there's a lot of situations in which you could use synthetic users. When we first launched, one of kind of my core ideas around the product and the way we were framing it was there's a lot of situations in people need good enough research. They don't need perfect research. And one of them was freelance user researchers. So imagine you are a freelance user researcher that need to switch topics quite frequently. Sometimes you're working with a B2C brand, figuring out how do people buy birthday cards online. Sometimes you're working with a tire company that sells tires to truck drivers, to a really specialized type of tire, for example. And you need to get up to speed to a topic in a really fast way. You could go online, you could go search for stuff. But imagine you could talk to people that you want to understand. This is the most obvious for me, is you need to get up to speed to a particular domain in a more interactive and a more human-like way. You can do this. And one of the reasons why synthetic users work so well is exactly because we are a little bit of a replacement to something that you could also do, which is you could go to subreddits and forums where people talk about their challenge. There's a subreddit and a forum for almost everything. In those places, people talk really honestly and openly about their challenges, about what they want, what they need, what they struggle with. And that is part of the training data of the models, and that's why the models work so well. So this is one core use case of our product. The other one is you have 20 concepts to solve a particular problem. How can you narrow it down to like 5? So then you spend the time that you have with humans, which is expensive, which is valuable, to make the best of it. Another one is just simply, I want to know better how my users might react to a particular difference in messaging. For example, I would never expect a company to rely uniquely on synthetic users. It's not what I expect the future to be. I don't think we will ever be the full-body replacement for humans. I just see my product as a tool. It's in the same way then when Photoshop came up, designers and people didn't stop using paper and pen. It was just some things serve a purpose and some things serve a different one. And most times they complement. You might wireframe something on your notebook, and then you go to Figma to really make it a little bit more fleshed out. So it's just a matter of understanding what are the places that maybe you wouldn't have done any research. You would have just said, hey, my gut says B, let's just go with B. Or where are the places when early feedback can be so important to avoid you going on weird avenues that will end up not going anywhere. So this is where we see us performing. And the more accurate these models become, the best. For example, in our particular product specifically, you can upload data that you have about your customers. You can upload market research data. You can upload interview transcripts to enrich the synthetic users. So I think what happens is that most people come to us and they just try to reproduce some study that they've ran recently. Then they look at the results and they're like, how is this possible? And then they're so impressed that they start gaining a little bit more confidence. But I haven't had a single customer that have said, I stopped talking to humans.
I'd love to hear a success story that you don't have to name names that helps us understand, like, what does this look like in practice? But I'd also love to hear about a time when it didn't work out, because that's very instructive too.
So one of the challenges of working in this space is there's a moral discomfort with the idea of mimicking people and with the idea of AI almost in general. And there's strong emotions about the topic. So most of our customers prefer not to be public about using us. That's why I'm going to keep it anonymous. But a really, really well-known brand was considering, funny enough, a couple of kombucha concepts. It was around a particular demand space, and they wanted to see how the particular group of young millennials on urban areas of the US, how they would react, what kind of emotions do they associate with kombuchas, what kind of emotions do they associate with kombuchas of particular flavors, and how well could several combinations and several ways of positioning. It was not only about the flavors, it was always about how they were framed, how it could serve their kind of relaxed time at the end of the day. And they ran, this is really not at all a replacement story, but they ran, I think, 200 interviews with us in 2 days. And then they went out in the field and they interviewed people with the same recruitment criteria as they had generated with synthetic users. It was a completely different team. And they asked them the same question. They got the same research guide, all of that. And then the two teams got together and they compared the results. And the rank, there was, I think, this were 15 concepts. There were 2 that were not the same in terms of rank, but everything else was the same. Even in terms of positioning, it fitted. So what that company understood was that they could have used synthetic users to kind of sort out just the top 5 and then go to humans to check those top 5, which one performed better. Because it was on the top 5 that was, I think it was number 3, that in our case was number 4, and switched places, and that's it. So they were quite confident with that. Same company was trying to understand something with their existing data. They had data, they used it with our RAG system. I don't like the name RAG. It stands for Retrieval Augmented Generation in the AI, generative AI space, but RAG is nothing more than adding context. You have some kind of context that might be helpful, and that's what RAG is for. So they used some interview transcripts, anonymized. We did a lot of work to clean them up to make sure that we weren't sending any personal data to the LLMs. And then we ran a couple of interviews, and this was essentially about segmentation. They wanted to see if there was any latent segmentation in the interviews that they've run as true synthetic users. And the segmentation that we ended up giving them, I wasn't a fan of the use case, because segmentation, I need our platform to run a lot more interviews for me to be confident in the results. But the segmentations were simply something that from the practitioner's viewpoint weren't solid. And we ended up parking that project and it didn't move on anymore. The company is still our customer, but focused mostly on concept testing. So this is segmentation, for example. We run at max 20 interviews per study. This is not a good number to try to do then segmentation on top of those interviews. So it's not something that our platform is built for. It's something that I really want to build, that we've done some prototypes, we have some early good results, but that needs a completely different type of scale for that kind of work. So there's work for which I simply don't recommend the platform.
That's so interesting. I think that's a really important point, that you understand the use cases your platform can nail, that you have confidence in, and then the areas that you don't. And maybe someone else will nail segmentation, because segmentation usually is for a different part of the, of the product journey, because all of this is people are wanting to develop some new product or service or a brand extension of something they're already doing, and trying to figure out what the market is and how to sell it to them. That sounds like the world you're talking about, yes?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So concept testing. Talk to us about concept testing. How does your platform work for concept testing?
Concept testing was one of our first interviews. When we first launched, we only had two types of interviews. Problem exploration one, kind of designed for those early days, in which we were trying to understand for a particular group of people, is this a real problem? Is this a problem worth working on? So we had that one. And then we had concept testing. And both these types of interviews, when we launched, were a fixed script. So it was just same questions independent of the problem and same questions independent of the concept. You can do concept testing with two different ways on our product. One is you decide exactly what questions to ask, or the other one is just you tell us, who do you want to interview? What's your recruitment criteria? It can be more oriented around jobs to be done, not necessarily demographics. It can be more attitudinal or psychographic. So it's up to you to decide. And then you tell us if you think your product solves a particular problem, and then you need to describe to us what is the concept, what is the idea, what is the service, what is the app that you want to have feedback on. For each interview, we generate, of course, the synthetic user, but we also generate a synthetic researcher that takes your research, the research goal, and interviews the synthetic user. So it starts by also trying to understand a little bit of the context, the problem space, and then it shows either visually or just by text the concept that you want to test to the synthetic user, and then asks about what you think, what are their thoughts about that concept. If they think the concept in some sense might help them, if yes, what are the concerns they have, how do they see it be improved. So essentially it's a way to get you early feedback on the concepts that you're trying to build. And this is for a single concept. We have the equivalent, but with multi-concepts, in which we generate the exact same users for all the different concepts you want to test. We run a study for each of the concepts, and then we give you a report that summarizes in a comparative way how each concept perform against each other.
How popular is concept testing? And has that changed over the last year or so?
It's quite popular, particularly since we launched multi-concepts. Multi-concept was something that we were being asked almost since day one. It's like, oh, I love it, but can I run with the same synthetic users? Before we had multi-concept as a standalone product, you could start different studies for each concept. But the main challenge was that there were going to be a lot of confounds in the data, because the synthetic users will not be the same from study to study. If the parameters of each synthetic user could change. So there was a lot of volatility and stochasticity in the way we were generating the synthetic users. With this new system, we guarantee that each synthetic user is exactly the same on each study, and that the results you get are really about the concepts themselves and not about some random variable that's changed from one study to the other. The other thing is that the report itself is designed to be a comparative report in which we rank the products or the concepts in order from the preferences of the synthetic users. But it has grown, particularly since multi-concept.
Thank you so much, Hugo. I just really appreciate your educating us and, being open to new ideas and taking us along for the ride.
Thank you so much for the opportunity, Amy. If you want to be someone who's up to date with how the world is moving and is willing to change your mind, and that is quite rare.
It's what we're all about here. Thank you. We'll talk soon. Thank you, everyone, for being here. And I hope you got a lot out of this. To be continued.